this pay-per-view almost exists in an absence now of any storylines, of anything else that's happening. There's no interwoven narrative. It's not, they didn't really turn up on each other's shows and help to build the matches very well. And it was really hard to get behind this Raw versus SmackDown, side versus side, team versus team.
Wrestling Rebooked. Spoiler in Andeve. Putting wrestling into submission. Welcome to Wrestling Rebooked with Spoiler and Andeve. Rewriting your favorite angles the way we want to believe. Putting wrestling into submission. Finally, that time has come. We used to rely on Meltzer. Now we bang our own drum. Wrestling Rebooked. Spoiler in Andeve. Putting wrestling into submission. The Spot Monkey is here, shooting from the hip, back to break more, and ready to let rip. Spoiler is the host. Will his mic be ready to go? He loves a mat clinic, and we're ready to start the show. From Mania to Survivor Series, a wrestling podcast. Each match rebooked, fresh views are cast. Wrestling Rebooked. Spoiler in Andeve. Putting wrestling into submission. Our finger is on the pulse for all the latest news. What's going on with Vince? We don't really get his views. We love a docket review, old school to new. I think it's time to tap out. Hit the music. We're through. Wrestling Rebooked. Spoiler in Andeve. Putting wrestling into submission.
Episode 10, Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission, and we're back. Spoiler here for another action-packed edition of Wrestling Rebooked, and joining me as ever, shooting from the hip, taking his place at the head of the Great British table, the Spot Monkey, Andeve.
Hey, Spoiler, thanks very much for that introduction. Going to kick off with Survivor Series, another gimmick pay-per-view that is well past its sell-by date.
Contain your excitement. Yep, Survivor Series. We're also going to be talking about what's going on with some of the releases in WWE at the moment and all things contracts, and also reviewing the Paul Bearer documentary that's doing the rounds on the network at the moment. As ever, social media, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, hashtag Wrestling Rebooked, or search for Wrestling Rebooked. Also worth noting, episode 9, previous episode, you can see us on YouTube. Search Rewind, Recap, Relive with Jonah, and watch the episode on there. Right, as you mentioned, Survivor Series, the 34th annual Survivor Series. The tagline: "The best of the best." Did we get the best of the best?
It was closer to the worst of the worst than it was the best of the best. I think, as a strapline, I mean, that's well wide of the mark. And Survivor Series is a pay-per-view. We talked about it on the last episode, as you've just alluded to there. Survivor Series was originally introduced as a sort of Thanksgiving pay-per-view to capitalize on the Hogan-Andre beef and interest. And obviously it survived and it's endured over time, but now it feels the worst of all the gimmick pay-per-views. And the show we watched was definitely not the best of the best.
So we kicked off with Team Raw against Team SmackDown, the now obligatory brand versus brand eliminator match. So we had AJ Styles, Riddle, Keith Lee, Strowman, and Sheamus against Jey Uso, Kevin Owens, Otis, Seth Rollins, and Baron Corbin. 19 minutes and 25 seconds for this match. I've got to be honest, I fast-forwarded the entrances. It just took forever.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of them.
No heels or faces or anything. Thoughts, Andeve?
I suppose I'll bounce that back first of all. Why did they do this match in such a way that there was no interconnected storylines and there was nothing even on the line? So, there was nothing sort of like, well, actually, if our team wins Raw, then the person that makes the successful pin, or whoever survived it will be then in line for a title shot, or don't lose SmackDown, otherwise Reigns is going to come and beat down on you one-on-one. Why do you think they just dropped this match in as a Raw versus SmackDown match and then just said, good luck, hopefully you enjoy it?
Synonymous with WWE at the moment, isn't it? That there's no thought or storyline gone into preparing these matches. And maybe we're getting to sort of the wider points of Survivor Series before the specifics of the matches, but there's no thought to this PPV and how it might feed into what's going to happen at Tables, Ladders and Chairs, the Royal Rumble, whatever it may be. It's funny because in the last episode, we talked about how Survivor Series in years gone by has been a bit of a marker to kick off Mania season, or a bit of a prelude. Couldn't be further from that here, could we? Couldn't be further from it. So, I mean, it started off, I mean, the writing was on the wall when we saw Rollins turn himself over effectively. I mean, fair enough if he's going to have some time away, but is that the right way to book basically one of your biggest stars?
I mean, you need to follow up with it on SmackDown at the very least, which they didn't bother doing.
Right. And really, it just felt like watching a TV match. You know, we have so many multi-man and woman tag matches, 6-man tags, 8-man tags, things like that on Raw and SmackDown now. And the guys just felt like they were going through the motions a little bit and just working one of those. There was no difference between this so-called Big Four PPV and an episode of Monday Night Raw.
100%. 100%. Think about the other pay-per-views. We've just had Hell in a Cell. Money in the Bank stands out. We've talked about whether or not we like gimmick pay-per-views, but at least with those, it adds something to the PPV genre or to the matches themselves and forces the superstars, even if we don't think that's the right thing, to go in a certain direction. This pay-per-view almost exists in an absence now of any storylines, of anything else that's happening. There's no interwoven narrative. It's not, they didn't really turn up on each other's shows and help to build the matches very well. And it was really hard to get behind this Raw versus SmackDown, side versus side, team versus team, when you've got Riddle, Styles, Sheamus, Rollins, Owens, who 2 weeks ago, and we talked about why the draft was delayed, but 2-3 weeks ago would have been on different sides. So why are they now suddenly so desperate to support brand supremacy? I don't think that's that hard to actually talk away in a few promos or a couple of storylines, but they actually can't even be bothered to do that. They just chuck these stars together. You've got 10 stars at ringside, and like you said, we see a lot of this 5-on-5 or 4-on-4. These multi-man tag matches, they're so hard to get right, and this didn't have a storyline, and it wasn't got right.
Yeah, for the sake of devil's advocate, you think about the way they built up, at least the Raw side, had a lot of skits on Monday Night Raw where they were doing almost like spoof comedy segments where Riddle's giving nicknames and Strowman's throwing a strop. SmackDown, they took the different tact of the late reveal, who's going to be on the team, who's the fifth member. It's a line that never is going to get boring. But when it came to the actual match itself in ring, it was just absolutely flat, and we just saw SmackDown rolling through the eliminations, an extension of that storyline with Styles, the skipper, as he was dubbed, the so-called leader, all of which led to just trying to further the Reigns Uso storyline. I mean,
yeah, very loosely, and they took it forward a little bit on SmackDown, but also you got to think about, in terms of protecting your talent or booking your stars, Raw's just absolutely obliterated SmackDown there, 5-0 elimination victory, if that's what it's called. So actually, where does that leave the SmackDown boys who've just been absolutely eviscerated and knocked out? How can you take Corbin seriously? But you're absolutely right. It sort of doesn't matter, because come the following week, all that's forgotten, and the pay-per-view wasn't built to anyway. It was almost just like something that it's calendared, and it's in the way of what else we might be thinking of doing if we're a booking team.
Silver lining for Andeve. Keith Lee gets the win. Did you not? You happy with that? Predicted that?
I think I said the power of Raw with Strowman and Lee was probably going, and Sheamus as well, I guess, was probably going to swing it their way. I didn't expect it to be 5-0. I thought, Lee picking up the win was quite plausible. Although probably the worst moment in the match for me was when Lee came face to face with Otis, and we've seen Lee being built at this year's Rumble when he came face to face with Lesnar. We've seen him last year with Reigns, looking like a superstar, and we can go back to Money in the Bank when we talked about that and Otis. He was really, really unwatchable. All the sounds he was making, all the dance moves or the shaking he was making, it's not because he's a big guy that it looks bad, because Rikishi did it and made it look good. It's just Otis and his character. And then when he was opposite Keith Lee, it just brought Lee down to Otis's level. And WWE recognises that because they've taken the Money in the Bank off Otis. So although Lee got the win, which was predicted, I found that bit quite hard to watch, to be honest.
Let's be honest. Since Keith Lee's been on the main roster, it's just been a disaster after another. Reference to him.
They certainly didn't know what they were going to do with him.
No.
Sort of shot the rocket to him, took it off him from NXT, put him straight into Raw, and then left him to get involved with McIntyre and Orton in a little bit. And now he's fronting off against Otis in a 5-man in a 10-man tag on Survivor Series that no one really knows who they want to win or why they want to win. Pointless.
Can we find any silver linings? Is there any rebooking angles?
There's lots of good talent in the match. I'm convinced that Riddle is a really, really good wrestler. They just need to drop all his bro and dope and all this stuff. That I get what his character is.
Yeah.
Just let him wrestle. I thought Sheamus looked all right, but Owens hitting a few stunners. But even that, it's like you're watching a tribute band, because you've seen Austin hit those stunners and a crowd go wild. Owens hitting it in an empty sort of, I don't know if it's a stadium or a room, but with all those other people at ringside and then getting eliminated, it just doesn't have the same feel or ring to it. So no, not too much there. I mean, if they're desperate to have Survivor Series, you're asking about rebooking, then you need to plan for it and plan into it and plan out of it and make sure that there's some sort of connections.
You talk about having a lot of talent in the ring, but how much of that talent in the ring is just a little bit stagnant at the moment? You mentioned Owens. He certainly falls into that category. Corbin, where's he been the last month, 6 weeks or so? Just with that crappy gimmick that we've talked about before, that is serving no purpose. Otis been done and overdone on this program. And it's just like, no one's invested. No one cares. What would happen if there was a crowd for that match?
Yeah, no, it's a really fair point, actually. Yeah. They're definitely. I think it would be hard to argue they weren't talented, but I think you're absolutely right. If you talk about how hot they are at the moment, Strowman's coming off losing the title. Riddle was fighting Styles on SmackDown for the Intercontinental title on his much heralded debut. Now both of them on Raw, not really doing too much, and Styles has picked up a big bodyguard that doesn't do anything. Sheamus had that in-out feud with Hardy since he's come back now. What's he doing? Rollins has been fighting Dominic Mysterio and Rey Mysterio since 1998 and is now written off TV. I can't remember who else is on the SmackDown. Jey Uso, to be fair, is probably at the peak of the program, but then that probably tells you all you need to know, because while he's had a great run for 6 weeks or 2 months, Jey Uso isn't the person you build your company and pay-per-views around.
Yeah. All right. New Day against the Street Profits, tag champs versus tag champs. 13 minutes and 40 seconds to tell the tale. I'll kick us off. So face versus face, which is something which I'm going to keep sort of feeding into here with today's episode. We had a babyface team against a babyface team, all kicking off with a flip, a dive, another flip, another dive, with no sort of build or momentum gain. Although when they did switch to slowing things down a little bit, I did quite enjoy New Day's basically heel work in slowing the match down, mocking Montez Ford on the apron.
You love to mock Montez Ford, don't you?
Well, yeah, we'll get to that shortly. Certainly. We then had some nice moves. I like the boom drop from Kofi Kingston. It executes it really well, looks effective, and it's easy to get. There's a guy lying on the floor, he tramples on him. So you can't, it has a good visual. We then had a Montez Ford leapfrog from the top rope.
Beautiful,
off he comes.
that was beautiful.
Lands it, bounces straight back off. Needs to work on that. And then just an awful finish where we had yet another blind tag, which we didn't mention in the last match, but there was a blind tag which led to some sloppy work from the in terms of the execution of the finish. And there was no Big E. Okay, great. Street Profits go over, which again I think we called, but opportunity missed.
Yeah, you're right about the Street Profit, but the two things you've ended there with, I definitely agree with. The Street Profits needed the win more, and why Big E wasn't involved, having turned up on the entrance ramp, and I thought maybe that meant he was going to. He was definitely going to get involved in some way, especially as he's been involved in all the skits with the Street Profits on the way into the pay-per-view. But his absence was a bit unusual, but good that the Street Profits won. I probably agree with you, actually, that I like a flip and a kick and a flip, whichever way it is, or, both, and then alternate it. But this felt more like a staccato set of gymnastics rather than a wrestling match with athletic moves. I didn't care much for the match. I don't know if they were trying to make it seem intense at the beginning and a big deal with the way the Street Profits dropped their promo and the way that the New Day came out in that gear to symbolize the computer game or whatever. But once it got going, and I think they were trying to give it this big feel because Cole or someone on commentary was like, "This is the New Day versus Street Profits for the first time." But I just didn't really care for it, to be honest. I mean, like I said, the athleticism was all right. That sliced bread move. There was a double underhook that Corey Graves didn't know what it was, but looked pretty good. And the Midnight Hour I felt was all right, but I just didn't really care for the match because I suppose, again, it's just existing in a vacuum and there's no jeopardy. There's nothing on the line. You can put some good wrestlers in together and hope they put on a good show. But actually, in this case, it just felt like a series of slightly disconnected athletic moves and spots rather than a match that had spots weaved in. So again, for me, didn't really take my fancy.
That's big coming from the spot monkey, isn't it? So that the spots need to be nuanced slightly to get you to hook you.
Yeah. Obviously, live the gimmick of being the spot monkey and the moments in the matches. I mean, when I think about spot, I think of what the match is building to, and the spots are almost like the transitions from one phase of the match to the next. It's the crescendo to the spot, and then it moves on to the next bit. And when you think about any huge headline matches, you think about the match, but the first thing that comes to your mind is the spots of the moments. I think Stone Cold covered in blood, passing out in the sharpshooter, that sort of thing. But this didn't quite flow. And I've seen Ricochet and Ospreay in a couple of matches, and obviously they're very athletic, but actually the matches felt put together a lot more. Whereas this felt very much like here's a spot, and how we're going to get there, we're not going to worry too much about. And the storytelling of the match is still obviously crucial. I just quite enjoy getting to that crescendo and a decent spot rather than getting that to crescendo and being some sort of headlock submission on the mat. But this didn't work for me.
I'm not sure we should ever be mentioning that match at WrestleMania 13 in the same breath as the Street Profits, but I take your point. There's definitely a theme developing here with this show, isn't there? So Sami Zayn versus Bobby Lashley, IC champion versus the US champion. And, well, 7 minutes and 50 seconds. Not a long match by any stretch. Heel versus heel.
Making you cry, is it? Heel versus heel after face versus face after a match where there was no heel or face.
Yeah, it's just how can you tell a story? How can you get you're talking about how can we invest in these matches and care more? Well, if you actually had a narration, you had something that was easy to follow, you would. And it's hard when you've got Sami Zayn, who a fantastic heel, sort of just trying to wiggle his way out of things, coming up with different reasons that the match should be stopped against the absolute brute that is Bobby Lashley. But they just don't really fit together.
That Zayn was pretty good though, don't you think? I mean, his only percent to the referee had vertigo or something, which I always find it quite funny when the ref's like, "Oh, hold on, stop the match for a minute," as though that's not the point of the match, to injure your opponent and be able to pin him. And then when he tripped over MVP, that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Penalty for that these days in the Premier League, but that was pretty good. It just felt a bit jokey. And Sami Zayn does walk that line, and he does it really well between is he sort of really serious and discontented with the world, or is he poking fun and having a laugh and making a joke of it? But the Intercontinental title is arguably the main title, in terms of history and legacy, and up against the US title, it just felt a little bit too jokey, and it didn't feel like a decent enough match. And it's probably because they didn't quite know how to put someone over without burying someone else, and they need them both to go over. So you're back where you started again, with a match with no jeopardy, where no storyline, no one's really punting for one guy or the other.
Yeah, especially when you've got two guys that are pretty hot at the moment as well. Lashley in the Hurt Business. Probably right result here as well for Lashley to go over.
I actually didn't even write down who'd win. I can't remember.
Submission.
Of course.
Zayn tapped out of the Lashley Nelson, the full Nelson, the Lashley lock.
The Hurt lock or whatever it's called.
Hurt lock,
which then, spoilers, but on Raw on Monday, Keith Lee wasn't able to be put into or whatever. So I don't know if that means that's a decent build for Lee or what, but it just a bit messy. Like, it doesn't, and they didn't call back to that on Raw either. So it's just again, the continuity of the storyline, or any sort of storyline, is just totally absent. And this match, 7 minutes, pretty short for a sort of the secondary title match. I can't really remember anything particularly of note happening. It's just Sami Zayn jumping out the ring, looking at Cedric Alexander, running back in the ring, looking at Shelton Benjamin. That's just a bit meh, but nothing.
Asuka versus Sasha Banks. Raw Women's Champion against SmackDown Women's Champion. Babyface versus Babyface. 13 minutes and 5 seconds. You want to kick us off on your favourite type of wrestling?
Well, we've seen this match really recently, and I expect this match was probably pretty good. I've only watched it once through. I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't really care for it. I wasn't invested for it. Like I said, we've seen this really recently, and the Asuka Banks Bayley feud was really, really good. I had a couple of decent matches. There was stuff on the line. It built the title was won and then given back, or won and then lost. We've had Bayley as part of that, and it's led to the fracturing of the role models. So having seen that, then suddenly we're back here again, having arrived here with no real fanfare or need for it. Actually, in this case, I think you're not crying over spilt milk. I think actually the face versus face didn't work, especially when Asuka's not been up to much recently. So what's the point? You sort of knew Banks couldn't lose because she's just been elevated on the turn, so it wouldn't make any sense to have a call off on her. But and again, I'm sure it was nice, but it just wasn't anything to write home about. A few nice counters and flow early on because they're good wrestlers, but I felt a few moves didn't really click. So there was Banks off the guardrail, didn't really work. A Hurricane Rana that Banks gave to Asuka where she just sort of collapsed, and a few roll-up reversals that looked far from slick. So although it was probably a good match, and there's people saying, watch it, you'll enjoy it, I've only seen that once. I just didn't really care for it in the context of what we were watching.
Struggle to come up with any alternative there. The chemistry is definitely there between the two. They're pretty well experienced. There's no way they should be having bad matches, and I don't necessarily think this was. The issue is more the wider point that we've already started to cover, and there's just no build. There's no reason to invest in this. So they kicked off with some nice mat-based stuff, exchanging of submissions. Will look out of place, an Olympic floor in for the wrestling there, and it flowed nicely. That then did transition to some of the things that you're talking about there that did look a little bit messy. Nice build of crescendo and pace down the stretch. But ultimately, when it gets to the finish, you're sort of like, right, next match, who cares? Like, there's just not
I can't even remember what happened at the finish. I mean, obviously, I know Banks won.
Yeah.
But just not invested enough in it. And especially when you've seen it so recently, where there was so much riding on it. And at SummerSlam as well, I think one of the matches was, and then followed up on Raw. So
yeah,
you're just always not going to be onto a winner. And while it probably wasn't a loser, it just doesn't capture the imagination.
Yeah. We also know Carmella. I mean, she's featured on SmackDown doing run-ins the last few weeks, and then she's here. Go figure.
And of course, from the Asuka point of view, I don't even know who's actually. Well, we do know who was challenging for the title a few weeks ago, but we'll talk about her on Finger on the Pulse. But there's no one even to get involved on that side. Not that we're just desperate for run-ins, but you're desperate for something to
latch
draw
onto
your attention. Yeah.
Okay, best we move on. Women's Eliminator, Team Raw against Team SmackDown yet again. Nia Jax, Shayna Baszler, the tag champs, Peyton Royce, Lacey Evans, and Lana against Team SmackDown, which was Bayley, Bianca Belair, Ruby Riott, Liv Morgan, and Natalya. This took 23 minutes and 20 seconds. This went longer than the men's, Andeve.
I mean, fine, but who's interested in this? Who is interested in this? I thought
I'll jump in there.
Go for it. Are you interested in this?
Not really.
Are you the person that's interested?
I mean, I also fast forwarded the entrances on here. Like, it just took so long. Interesting to note as well that we know, of course, over the last 9 weeks, Lana's gone through a table, and she comes prancing down to the ring. Big smile on her face, completely no selling. In fact, she's been through a table so many times. Let's try and find some silver linings here. I think Natalya is probably still the best worker. Like, she's still, her in-ring work is just solid. Like, whenever she's there,
the facts about her are, I mean, they must be true because I've heard Cole say it before. He said it again, but she's appeared on more pay-per-views than any other women's wrestler and won more matches than any other wrestler. I mean, that's that should be more part of her gimmick, shouldn't it? Rather than just throwing away on commentary. 8
in a row, I think, it's eliminator matches. But anyway, I digress. The match generally was just colder than cold. There was very little chemistry between any of the talent. Obviously, not a lot of storyline interwoven that we've talked about before. And you actually look at the way they booked it there. Bayley going out being pinned by Peyton Royce.
What a nonsense. The biggest star. And she was actually booked. I mean, in the promos, it's a total departure from the character she has been playing. The sort of angry, aloof heel. It's just sort of joking backstage, doing high fives, and then she goes out first. So the one star, maybe one of the 3 stars you need to protect, you've ended up sacrificing first up. Or maybe that is protecting her because the match is so bad she's out of it and she's out of your memory. I don't know.
What would creative say here? They're trying to get Peyton Royce over as a singles competitor. There's other ways of doing it, though, isn't there?
Yeah. Also, can't remember what she did after that in the match. She certainly wasn't kicking around at the finish.
Got pinned.
So I mean, who cares? And they didn't follow up on SmackDown either. So she's going to come out and say, "I'm actually excellent because I pinned Bayley." Blah blah blah. But it's almost like this pay-per-view is non-canon. It's just a sort of a house show on the side. I thought the only good bit was the sort of Riot Squad. I don't know if they're back together as the Riot Squad now or whatever, but they are. The Riot Squad versus Jackson Baszler I've actually thought it wasn't bad, which isn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but it sort of at least hints that there's somewhere this program could go. But the rest of the stuff was rubbish. Like you say, Bayley getting gone first. Also, Lacey Evans' finisher is that punch, that women's right. I didn't realize that. I've obviously been fast forwarding a lot. I think the Big Show punch is rubbish, but at least he's massive and his hand's probably the size of my face, like saucepans. But what is she about with the women's right? Oh.
It's funny you say that. What about the Big Show? It's the sort of thing you could get away with booking wise maybe 20, 30 years ago, where you've got that one move that just wipes someone out and it just is a finisher. But these days, you can't.
It's just a punch, isn't it?
You can't be getting away with that. It just doesn't work. Again, devil's advocate slightly. Bianca Belair.
Oh yeah.
Booked quite strongly despite the finish.
You called for that as well, didn't you?
Yeah. Well,
Rebooked show.
Maybe we know wrestling.
Maybe they're just signposting that what's going to happen on the product so much that it's just inevitable. That's what they have to do because that's all they can do.
Of course, couldn't let her have it because Lana wins the match having stood on the steps for the best part. Well, hold on. How long's this match? 23 minutes. She must have been on the steps 15 minutes.
Yeah, ridiculous.
And it didn't make sense anyway because Nia Jax is angry that she's won the match.
Yeah, Nia Jax is bullying her by making her stand on the steps, having put her through tables.
Yeah.
however many weeks in a row. Yet a few years ago, Nia Jax was in an angle where she was being bullied. So that's why she wanted to win the title. I know that's years ago, but it just, where's the thought? Where's the continuity?
Shane Baszler doesn't have a little bit more elevation in the main title scene. They missed a trick when Rousey was around, I reckon.
Well, she was going to be the star of Raw Underground, wasn't she? Wherever that's gone. She's in this tag match with Jax. Normally, it's because eventually they're going to turn on each other, but they've got them with the tag titles, Asuka with the title, and they're all in these matches that no one cares about.
Can we possibly rebook this? Just get rid of it.
If you have to have it on the show, why is it 5 versus 5? It just prolongs it for 2 more pins. Make it 4 versus 4. Get rid of it. Yeah. Have the people that Lacey Evans and Bayley look stronger. I don't know. It was about as much of a mess as the men's one was, really.
You can maybe cut some slack. They had to make some last minute changes with Mandy Rose being injured.
And obviously they're firing some of their staff that are supposed to be in it, but still, it's just not of interest. A 5-on-5 women's match for no reason at all. Halfway through, we're 2/3 of the way through a pay-per-view. No jeopardy, no build, and no fallout.
There was a reason.
What was the reason?
Brand supremacy.
Of course, yeah, of course. Who won? Raw. So Raw's the supreme brand, even though SmackDown is on Fox and much better. Never mind.
Yeah. So we get to the main event. Was it Universal title holder versus the WWE champion? So Reigns and McIntyre. Michael Cole billing Roman Reigns as the marquee name of SmackDown. Kind of a big match feel, and they actually, when you look at those two in the ring, you think that's 2 wrestlers in a ring.
Yeah, that's excellent. They've got a very, very similar look. That the long dark hair, the sort of darkish complexion, both fighting shirtless and looking absolutely jacked. Big entrances, big moves.
Heyman.
Yeah, decent at ringside.
And a heel versus a face.
Yeah, that's true. Which they've actually faced off before, haven't they? A few times. Partly when Strowman's pack was kicking around, and Ziggler and McIntyre and that as the heels with the Shield, sort of as the face, even though they were doing heel things. And then they had a match at WrestleMania last year. Well, before this year, before 30, what were we on? 6, so 35, where Reigns had come back and it was somewhere down the card. And it was sort of quite forgettable. I think you're right about the look and the sort of approach to the match. It looks like it should be excellent. And there's obviously a twist in dynamic because the roles are reversed in terms of face and heel where they've been before. But something about the two of them in the ring together doesn't click for me. And probably similar to the women's, that it probably was quite a good match. And again, I've only watched it once, but when I think about some of the bits where Reigns was looking strong and chucking McIntyre through the announce table and the spear through the barricade, although we've seen that quite a lot now. I did a couple of spears and that sort of stuff and a few big moves. It probably was quite a good match, but for some reason, maybe there's no jeopardy in it. Maybe it's because you've seen it before. But I also think something about these two guys in the ring, it just not quite clicked for me ever. I just wasn't invested or interested in it, really.
What would change that? How can we? Because it's basically the common theme throughout the whole card, right?
Yeah.
We're just not investing in these matches. Like, does the title have to be on the line? Do we need a decent storyline as a backing? Do we need a crowd?
Probably all those things would help. I mean, really what you're looking for is, first of all, have you got 2 decent wrestlers in the ring? And I guess the answer is yes. Reigns has been doing fantastic work since he's been back, is arguably the superstar of the year. Mm-hmm. McIntyre has been superb since the Rumble, which is actually January, and then had a really decent first title run, has been doing some good work with Orton, even though maybe the matches have been slightly missed the mark in terms of how good they might have been. So you've got 2 top guys in the ring. Are they doing top guy things? Maybe. The story just isn't there. Brand supremacy, but do they care that much about their brands? I don't know.
Never mind, do they care? Do we care, the fans?
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah, I suppose that's the point. Do you care whether SmackDown or Raw ultimately win? I mean, who won Survivor Series? I don't
Interesting, from Survivor Series gone past in the last few years, they've had the graphic on the screen. Certainly when NXT have been involved, how many matches have been won. There was even matches on the pre-show in previous years, whereas this year we just had a battle royal, which The Miz won.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
So just to back you up a second there on your comment about Superstar of the Year being Reigns, surely it's McIntyre. He's sort of held things together through the COVID era, hasn't he? Surely he would have to be a contender for that.
Yeah. But that's why I'm sort of struggling with myself a little bit. My inner demons here of the match. When I think about it, it should have been quite good, but I was watching it not interested. I suppose I did find the start a bit boring, where they were just headlocking each other, and they were headlocking each other on the mat. But then I can also think about some nice bits in the match where McIntyre reversed a spear into sort of an arm lock that ended up on the mat. But I just wasn't interested in it, really.
I think, just going into the specifics of the match itself, there was a lot of power move, near fall, nothing, just sort of dead time for everything up to sort of what felt like a minute and 90 seconds where they're just sort of rolling around. Sort of similar to some of the later Taker matches at Mania, where he was just rolling around for so long. I mean, fair enough that you're talking about Reigns and McIntyre, who are big power wrestlers. They have a lot. Their moveset is power moves, and it sort of worked down the stretch because you then had the.
Okay, I mean, did you enjoy it?
Not particularly. I was excited for it. I was probably more excited for this than any other match on the card.
I agree.
That doesn't say much, though, does it?
No, but there's something about when it got started for me. It just lost any.
Yeah.
Just lost all its impetus. I was interested in the run up, and then it just lost its impetus as soon as it started. So
we had the 2 trips through the table, and we had the spear through the barricade, and then the kick out at 2 from off the back of that from McIntyre. We then, of course, had the low blow and a 3 count.
Yeah, that's right. And there was also the end of the match. How many times is an Uso, some description, going to run into a match and drop a super kick?
Yeah.
And in 2020, do they not train refs how to take a bump? Because McIntyre knocked into Reigns, and Reigns must have jumped about 3 meters to sort of hit the ref on his foot or on his hand, and the ref to roll out the ring like he'd been power axed in the head. I
think it's more about timing, though, isn't it? Having the right people in the right position at the right time to be able to execute that. You're effectively looking for like a 3-man domino effect. Not to excuse it. Yeah, I agree with you. It looked ridiculous, but
I wonder. Just a question back at you as well. I wonder if this had been on an episode of Raw, McIntyre versus Reigns. Maybe it's too big for that for a TV show now. But if it had been on an episode of Raw, and you hadn't sort of sat through half a dozen matches that you're not interested in and fatigued, and this is probably 2.5 to 2:40 into the show, perhaps maybe you'd be more interested. I don't know.
Well, when I do watch Raw, that I do have to sit through matches of getting fatigue and matches I don't care about. So it's not a lot different. Yeah. But possibly, it could have actually had the reverse effect in that big match feel on Raw doesn't happen too often, where there was a degree of inevitability about this match. From reading the dirt sheets, it appears we could be on for Reigns McIntyre at Mania, which could be, sowing the seeds here. For that.
I suppose one of the reasons maybe it doesn't work is that perhaps McIntyre has suffered a little bit from, he's such a dominant face that unless he's coming up against, I suppose Reigns is dominant as well, but because he's such a dominant face, I think he loses a little bit of something there, because is he ever really in trouble? He certainly doesn't look it. And then some of his wins, the one against Orton, where every single super legend that Orton had crossed paths with got involved, it then doesn't.
The last man standing match.
Yeah. It doesn't show. It doesn't show off McIntyre in the way it might do. So maybe McIntyre suffers a little bit because he's such a dominant face that it's hard to think he's ever going to lose. And maybe Reigns as a heel is at his best when he's swatting people away, but you can't really swat away McIntyre because he's so big. So then the dynamic of the match, even though you've got your heel versus face setup, it doesn't best fit those two superstars.
I think McIntyre has lost, hasn't he? He's lost this match. He also lost to Orton, losing his title not that long ago. So he is losing matches. Would this have been any better with Orton, either as a triple threat or Orton instead of what would it have been? McIntyre.
Perhaps. I mean, that's also big, isn't it? Orton's not even on the card. He's not part of Team Raw. He's not even just turning up and being annoying. No. I don't know. I think probably if you to take the match in a vacuum, it was probably a fairly decent match. But then that is a paradox in itself, because the reason it probably was less interesting than it should have been or might have been or deserved to be is because the match is existing in a vacuum. We're not going to see those two come together again until the Royal Rumble or whatever. And it's not even going to be mentioned. I imagine the booking team are now just going to forget about that. And then come February, if they are together, then, it's back on again. But gone are the times where there's Survivor Series to WrestleMania, we can actually see some sort of build.
Well, we're going to talk about what's going to happen next year, potentially, very shortly. Okay, so I guess that takes us to, are we billing this as the main event or just the closing of the show?
Yeah.
The Undertaker farewell, which it had received massive hype to the extent where it was effectively the title of the show, Survivor Series, The Undertaker 30-year farewell. And just for context, just quickly running through. So we had entrances of multiple legends that all came down to the ring and shook hands in a COVID era.
Including people like 70-year-old Ric Flair, and then also Jeff Hardy used to wrestling on SmackDown, dressed as with the Undertaker's sort of face paint on.
Yeah. We then had a fantastic package, to be fair, of sort of classic moments and clips from Taker's history. And then cut from that, we had Vince in the ring. Everyone else had vanished.
Yeah.
Then we had the Taker entrance, which was obviously its normal sort of prolonged entrance. His promo, and then his exit, and that was it. There was no sign of anyone else. So it's hard to comprehend that lot.
Well, it's a bit, I don't understand. I do understand. I don't understand. Obviously, it's 30 years, and Undertaker on a card is going to draw some buy rates. I don't know, viewers. Maybe you can push your advertising cost up a little bit, but I always think it's slightly unusual, and they've done it on Raw for anniversaries or for birthdays or whatever, where you get all these stars hit the ring, and I don't know if something is said off screen. I mean, there's no fans there, so presumably not. All these people are then basically hitting the ring for the benefit of us at home seeing their entrance. But if you're watching as a casual fan, you probably don't understand why the Godfather is so involved in the show. Jeff Hardy, I mean, they did have a match with Undertaker on, I think it was SmackDown. It might be
which they do reference.
That was fantastic. But Ric Flair, him and the Undertaker haven't really crossed paths. Obviously, Shawn Michaels and Triple H, that makes sense. But they all hit the ring. There's no messages or recollection of times gone by. Then you're right, it goes off the air, it comes back on, and they've all gone. So, I mean, obviously they're going to have a party backstage, I assume, socially distanced, of course. And hopefully with COVID tests, hashtag surely not. But what's the point of all that? Before then, Vince comes out to introduce The Undertaker. The best bit, as has been the best bit of The Undertaker for the last 5 years, was his entrance, which was superb. But I wondered where he was coming from. There was so much smoke and all that sort of stuff. His speech in the ring was okay. It's pretty much, The Undertaker's not necessarily known for his promo, so that made sense. And then he went again. I mean, I don't really know why they need to do that. Surely you could just do that. Wait till fans are back. It doesn't matter when he retires, whether it's on a Survivor Series episode or if it's on Money in the Bank next year. Like, who cares? Why does it have to be the 30th year anniversary? So it was just all just like the show, really. It happened in the absence of any sort of necessity or storyline.
Yeah. This really summed up WWE in a nutshell, just the best and worst of their product. I mean, this segment went nearly 30 minutes.
It was 27 minutes was his walk into the ring, was it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was quite enjoying some of the Legends entrances. Some you're expecting to see, some you're not. Nash, for example, the way he walks and that look on his face, it's just like...
He struggled to get in the ring, though.
Yeah. As you mentioned about the Godfather, okay, never mind what's he doing there, but in fact, he hasn't been relevant for however many years. And people that don't necessarily know about the Undertaker's relationship with some of these guys.
Yes.
To be fair, Michael Cole does explain some of them as they're coming in, like Jeff Hardy, for instance, obviously references Triple H's matches with Taker at Mania, ditto Shawn Michaels. So I quite enjoyed that. Ditto the package. They do that very well, I think, the way they put that together. That's obviously nothing to do with creative, is it? That's, the Jonas of this world backstage.
Yeah, it's outsourced.
Yeah. Vince, like a ghost.
I suppose he is pretty old now. Yeah,
his voice just totally...
Yeah. Undertaker's actually only 55, 56, but he's been... Father Time has been up against him for the last few years, hasn't it?
Very much so. Very much so. I think I thought the Taker promo was okay. Like, nice, short, to the point. It's never going to be a long one, is it? Didn't need to be.
No.
Did what it needed to do. The hologram of Paul Bearer.
Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, why they need it on the show other than the fact it's his anniversary?
Yeah.
Surely, I mean, I suppose he's probably going to come back anyway when there's fans. He'd be inducted into the Hall of Fame and that sort of stuff. So maybe that's the plan, and he'll do his final, like, thanks for everything and all that sort of stuff. But it was just a bit nothing, really.
It's all a bit smoke and mirrors, which is ironic to some degree. Yeah. It was a bit of a shame there's no fans, but
it's good to see the Mayor Kane turn up. Still wearing poor. I think, as Randy Orton said, as he's getting older, he regrets wearing the trunks because he likes to have a beer and it's harder to keep that sort of decent physique that he's got. I mean, surely Kane regrets wearing skin. I suppose he didn't think when he was younger that at 50 and as the mayor, he would still be coming to the ring with a mask and some skin tight morph suit. But he struggled as much as Nash did. But I suppose in Kane's defense, he's got that on, whereas Nash is just wearing jeans and a t-shirt and can barely walk.
Irony of that, of course, is that Kane had a couple of failed gimmicks prior to the Kane gimmick.
That's right.
One of which was, of course, the Diesel, the fake Diesel. So anyway, irony not lost on us. Right. Closing thoughts on Survivor Series.
So closing thoughts on this Survivor Series are: don't worry if you've missed Raw and SmackDown for the past month. Wouldn't bother watching any of the matches except for the women's and Reigns and McIntyre. Have low expectations and just watch the match while you're drinking a cup of tea or something or beer, and don't think about it much more than that because it makes you sad, and you'll probably enjoy it. Generally speaking, this is a gimmick PBV like any of the others, Hell in a Cell or TLC, etc. It's actually less needed than any of those other pay-per-views. It's just a roadblock in the calendar, and it's now just played out in the absence of any sort of storyline. So in 2020, in COVID 2020, we just didn't need Survivor Series.
Yeah,
sorry.
Fair enough. I think for me, the format is just a little bit tired. Generally, it needs a bit of a spring clean. Or an autumn clean, shall we say. It doesn't really fit as well with the way they structure their storylines and their product generally around what they're doing from month to month, PPV to PPV. Matches were poorly booked. Even though the talent were going through the motions a little bit in terms of, look at Styles and Riddle on the edge of the ring in between tags, most of which were cold anyway. And my closing thought here would be the fact that actually here we are advertising, booking, putting on last a guy that's retired, not even fighting, dropping a one-line promo, and that's your main selling point for the PPV. It's just a bit of a sad indictment, really, of where we're at. And it'd be interesting to know what the rest of the locker room think of that Taker going on last, rather than the guys that are at the top of their game at the moment.
The question, don't know.
Probably a good time to move on then. Episode 10, Section 2, Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. We're back with a finger on the pulse. And this week, we couldn't really let things pass without talking about the release of Zelina Vega from her duties at WWE. As per written on Sports Illustrated, that WWE and Zelina Vega had come to terms and wished her all the best on her future endeavors. She then released a tweet later that day saying that she supported unionization. Things just went on a little bit, and there was an article published in Wrestling Inc. where Andrew Young, who's quite heavily involved in wrestling, former Democratic presidential candidate, nevertheless. And he said is that wrestlers are afraid to speak out. And I've had wrestlers past and present reach out to me and say that Vince has been getting away with exploitation of wrestlers, calling them independent contractors while controlling their activity for years and years. A lot of it is just that they are a quasi-monopoly. And wrestlers fear that if they do try and unionize or organize in any way that Vince doesn't like, they will never work again. So, Zelina Vega is gone. Let's talk about that first in terms of the gap that it leaves in the locker room.
It's very interesting, the timing, because she seems to be on the cusp of a push. She fought on Raw against Asuka for the title, and albeit she lost, but she
fought on PPV.
Did she? Was it on a pay-per-view? Right, sorry. So she was obviously on the cusp of a push. So you're tempted to say that this must have blindsided WWE a little bit, and this wasn't the plan going forward. She was also advertised for Survivor Series. I guess a counter to that would be that Gallows and Anderson were at WrestleMania, and then 2 days later they were bounced out. So maybe this is how WWE saw things going, but it definitely left a gap, and it definitely seemed like it came left of center.
Yeah, massively, and especially if you think back to the last. All right, let's go back to March, when those early episodes of Monday Night Raw, I thought to some extent she was carrying the show somewhat.
That's right.
She certainly helped get Andrade over, and then Angel Garza. And then, of course, into her singles run. It was only until that she had somewhat kind of half-baked push, which got her match against Asuka, did things start to dip off slightly. And, of course, now this has happened. So before you even get to the ins and outs of why she was actually released, in terms of the gap that it leaves on the product, I mean, she's advertised at Survivor Series. She won her qualifying match. We've just been talking about the women's match and how much that stunk.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she'd have made much difference to it, but when the news initially broke, people were talking about the unionization tweet, but it seems now we're a bit further down the line that actually what happened was the unionization tweet was a response to why she'd been released. We actually talked way back on our first episode that was to do with the releases, that actually the way WWE has treated, looked after, or lack of look after for its stars is clearly a problem. Just treating them as independent contractors so they don't have to pay them holiday or expenses or healthcare or whatever it is. And Zelina Vega has fallen foul of that to an extent. You can certainly see her point in terms of unionization, and the quotes you're reading there in terms of people are worried about Vince, that maybe is a good thing in terms of AEW, because for the first time, I suppose with Impact on the slight rise as well, and maybe the success of New Japan crossing over, that for the first time there is somewhere else to legitimately work with decent pay since the fall of WCW, well, TNA, I suppose, that there's actually somewhere else decent to go, because you can certainly see a few people put their heads above the parapet and say, actually, we want to form a union and have some collective bargaining, which, personally, I'm all for in any walk of life, in any industry, in any business. You can see that Vince would shut them down. You never work again. So maybe WWE reacting like this is partly because Vince is getting a little bit tetchy that there's other places people can go.
There's talk, wasn't there, that Zelina was earning more off her Twitch and Cameo accounts than she was in ring or through her WWE contract.
Yeah, which is a madness, really, that she's earning more from her social media accounts than she is from her annual salary. I mean, you can then see why she would put the horse before the cart and actually go, well, the media stuff is, the cart before the horse is the phrase, and then the media stuff becomes more valuable. I think the straw on the camel's back was something about her OnlyFans, where she was setting up an OnlyFans site with some subscription, and you paid a certain amount of money to see, I don't know, certain content or whatever. And Vince was that was the last straw. Is like, no, hold on a second, it's bridge too far for whatever reason.
But just to play devil's advocate, like surely if Vince was to allow Zelina to get away with this, what sort of precedent would that set?
Yeah, from his point of view, I see what he's saying. I mean, but I would say that he's overreaching. He's overreaching. So I think absolutely in most jobs, there's and especially one like this, there's a corporate social responsibility. There's contractual obligations, and you have to curve some of your unlimited freedoms a little bit. But I think he's overreaching in saying that superstars can't have their own accounts, stuff like that. I can't, and I think he's trying to get on it now. I mean, I can't imagine. You can imagine The Rock with all the stuff that he's got, the platforms that he has. If you're going to say, actually, no, you can't use that sort of stuff. And I think it would be different if they're always there as playing their character, as if it's an extension of the product. But actually, when they're there on their own right, doing their own stuff, presenting and selling themselves and advertising and marketing themselves in their own way, I think they've got every right to do that. And as long as they're not bringing the company into disrepute, I'm not really sure that I think Vince should be able to have that level of control.
Such a tricky thing, isn't it, though? Because you could have, in theory, have a wrestler who is a heel on the show, but he's doing all like babyface type attitude. He's connecting with fans and he's leaving messages and being a nice guy, but there he is on the show. I mean, isn't that technically that's bringing the company, breaching the contracts because he's not who he portrays?
No, not for me. My comparison there would be if you've got an actor, they're allowed to have their own. They don't just represent that character on TV. They're playing a character. They're in gimmick. The stuff away from that is not an extension of the show. In which case they should be able to do whatever they want. And of course, the reverse there is that you're going to have stars joining WWE that have already got this profile or whatever before they get there. So it's not as though WWE can even say, oh, well, we created them and now they're exploiting our name. Actually, they're already in that situation. Someone like Will Ospreay, for example, if he's to join WWE, and then you're going to say to him, you need to close down all your media, your social media, because it contravenes what you're doing on the show. I mean, in 2020, if you're a heel on the show or a face on the show, or if you play the gobbledygooker on the show, whatever, it's fine. I don't believe that Lashley is actually the CEO of the Hurt Business. So if he's on Twitter talking about the stuff he's doing and someone says, oh, so you're not actually the CEO of the Hurt Business, like, who cares? Come on.
Yeah. So where does that leave Zelina then, especially has a 90-day non-compete in her contract, so she won't be able to do anything for a while. But I mean, does she turn up in AEW?
Surely, despite them saying that they're not WWE light and they won't just be going after WWE superstars, they are WWE light and they are just going after WWE super. Exactly. So and good, fair play to her. Good luck to her. I think she turns up in AEW. She looked like she had a lot to offer as a manager, and she looked like she had a decent amount of in-ring talent. So why not go to AEW? And it'd be interesting to see how Khan, Jericho, and Omega and co, whoever else is involved in that at the top, their VP level, how they manage their superstars accounts. But it's not the first time we've seen this sort of thing, because we had Vince getting upset about Moxley appearing on Renee Young's account baking a cake or something.
Yeah.
We had Paige biting back about she can't wrestle anymore, so why can't she use this platform? So, for me, the example is that the wrestlers are performing on the show. If they're heel or face on the show, whatever they are, fine. But what they do away from that is absolutely fine. And you wouldn't have TV characters. You wouldn't have actors in TV shows or film or in cinema only able to act as that individual, because we know they're playing a part. We know that kayfabe is dead. I just can't see how Vince can have this level of control.
Funny you mentioned those two, Paige and Renee Young, because they're both very active on social media, and are now, if you've dropped by their pages in the last sort of few weeks, they're now actively pushing their own Cameo and Twitch accounts. I believe Zelina's changed her name as well. She's now using a new gimmick.
Yeah.
So, but maybe Vince thinks that kayfabe isn't dead. In his world, he's still 9.95.
I think for him, it's about money. He's suddenly seen all these sites. I think Zelina Vega's fans site or whatever it is, OnlyFans, was $30 for the latest bit of content or whatever it was. And I don't know if that's a month or whatever, but anyway, if 1,000 people are turning up with that for $30 as a one-off or whatever, I think he's thinking, well, hold on, we'll do it through WWE. And again, to an extent, that's fair enough if you're then going to pay them and support them effectively. But if you're on one hand going to say you're an independent contractor who doesn't get holiday or medical insurance, but then on the other hand going to say also you can't have your own independent social media, then the two things are incongruent. I think it's just about money for him, and he's probably out of touch and things are moving quicker than he's able to keep in front of.
Yeah, I think that's almost certainly true, isn't it? And that's not just social media, that's his product.
It's his booking as well.
Yeah. Certainly for sure. But I mean, at the end of the day, he has actually now taken control, hasn't he? So all of the social media stuff is being controlled by WWE, and then he's then giving them a slice of the pie, of their own pie, so to speak.
Yeah. So actually what's happened is he's extorting them. They're giving him the money they would have been having while not getting paid holidays and all that sort of stuff on an off season.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So I guess the last point is Aleister Black, who's also been quite vocal. Selina's wife, still on the WWE roster, asked to go down to NXT, but that request was rejected.
Yeah.
Have we seen him on TV since?
Has he seen himself? Because he's only got one eye these days, hasn't he? So between him and Mysterio, they've got a full set.
Maybe he'll start going through tables every week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good comparison. I suppose that the Zelina Vega story really is, I guess the first thing is a story in itself, and it doesn't really matter what happens with Black, but it's certainly interesting to think about Lana's treatment in the context of Rusev. I guess Aleister Black has been struggling so much. Maybe it'll be a positive for him. Maybe allow him to be a breakout and get some TV time. Or maybe it'll just mean Vince will be like, nah, I'm not interested in you. And he can go, thanks very much. I'll go to AEW and do the decent stuff I was doing in NXT before you ruined my character. Because he was fantastic in NXT.
They've changed his entrance theme now as well.
Yeah. He has a unique look, a style. He had a good gimmick. I don't know what happened to him. Maybe that's why he's already off TV, because there was the issues with Vega. But in any case, I don't know.
All right, second part of Finger on the Pulse today, and WWE have released their pay-per-view schedule for 2021. So I'll run you through it, Andeve. Per itnwwe.com, we're going to have the Rumble in January. No surprises there. Elimination Chamber in February, late February. WrestleMania will then be at the end of March and still being advertised as WrestleMania Hollywood.
Is that 1 day or 2 day or 5 days?
Advertised as 1 day, the 28th of March.
Blimey, what's that? Let's start at 9 a.m. and finish at 9 p.m.
When you fall asleep.
Yeah.
Money in the Bank will be the early May. Backlash late June. Extreme Rules will be the end of July. SummerSlam late August as usual. Clash of Champions late September. Hell in a Cell is October. Survivor Series, of course, at Thanksgiving. And TLC is scheduled for December 2021. So I guess the first question is, are we getting the most out of the product by having this setup, this structure for PPVs as it stands?
How many pay-per-views is that?
12.
So it is down, because sometimes they end up with every so often one every 2 weeks. So it ends up being 15 or 16 or something. I mean, I think the Rumble is a good way to kick off the year. Even people that don't like wrestling talk about the Royal Rumble. So that makes sense. And of course, Mania should be where Mania is. I quite like the Elimination Chamber as a pay-per-view and as a setup and as a build to Mania. Money in the Bank after Mania helps to reset. I don't really know what's Backlash about. Who knows? Then Extreme Rules and all that into SummerSlam, Clash of Champions. I don't know. When you say, is this setup helping? Do you mean having 12 pay-per-views, or do you mean having the gimmicks? What's your thinking there?
So, firstly, I mean, if you think back to a couple of years ago, we had brand-specific PPVs. That's when we were getting them every 2 weeks. Anything up to 20 we were having in a year. So clearly that was too much product, and especially in a COVID era. So we're now down to 12, assuming that we're not going to have fans back anytime soon, at least not in the States anyway.
Yeah.
Is it the best way to have a monthly PPV? So I guess that's the first point. I'll answer my own question shortly. And secondly, are these the right PPVs at the right time of year? If you're going to work on the basis that you're going to have Mania when you're going to have Mania, same with the Rumble and SummerSlam. For example, is having Money in the Bank in June like the right time to start pushing and elevating someone? Why not have that in February and with the potential of someone cashing in at Mania?
Yeah, I suppose. I suppose in terms of what you're asking there, the pay-per-views, I think if you go, you have to have stuff to build towards, and otherwise Raw and SmackDown are going to be even more meandering than they already are. If you're saying Mania is in March, April, well,
March 28th,
as it always sort of has been. March. So is that a bit earlier than normal, actually?
Yeah, about a week earlier.
Anyway, that's who cares? But if you're going to have Mania, then obviously it makes sense to have the Rumble. I don't think the Elimination Chamber in between Mania and the Rumble really makes sense, because it almost then becomes conflicting with the Rumble. I don't know why you don't have Elimination Chamber as the Rumble equivalent before SummerSlam. That would. It's just my keenness on a symmetry. But that would work quite nicely. Like, let's have a qualifying for SummerSlam. The back end of the year seems to be dominated by gimmicks, tables, ladders, and chairs, Hell in a Cell, all that sort of stuff. We've talked before. Yeah, Survivor Series. Quite keen to pull some of those gimmicks and just let it be a pay-per-view. But then when I look at the pay-per-views and look at Backlash, that's the one that stands out as what's going to happen there. I suppose you let story take its course.
Add to the mix, just to interject there, July is Extreme Rules. So
right.
Extreme Rules, SummerSlam, Clash of Champions, which I guess you could call, you can argue that's a gimmick PPV. Yeah.
Do I like the setup? I like the pay-per-views. I think we talked last time out, we'd like to tweak this idea of everything's got to be a gimmick pay-per-view. You asked about Money in the Bank. I wouldn't have it before Mania, because I think the build to Mania is about what's come out of the Rumble and ending stories. I quite like the fact that you can have Money in the Bank after Mania to the same sort of extent as the draft, which sort of resets and sets up the year ahead. As long as the pay-per-views are decent, you have one a week.
Yeah.
But while they're so lethargic and lacking in quality and direction, what's the point? One good thing this year has been the decline in the length. So we were getting to a point where every pay-per-view, or the bigger 6 hours or whatever. No.
Yeah. There's also a function now, isn't there, on the WWE Network, which allows you to skip directly to the start.
Yeah.
Whoever done that needs a pat on the back.
I mean, what do you think? I'm sort of just
meandering.
Yeah, posturing here.
Oh, look, I think for me, the big four are going to stay where they are, and that's kind of where we've been historically, and that's where they should be. So if you work around that, do we need another one in between the Rumble and Mania? If you do, why not have it as a B-level PPV? It doesn't need to be a gimmick. We don't need to see the Elimination Chamber. It's a tied format. So no, get rid of it. Post-Mania, I think the draft is the ideal time to do that. Why not build a PPV around a draft? That way you vest people's interest in the draft. Matches have more meaning, and you can take it from there. After that, you can then lead into you're going to have gimmick PPVs. That's a good time to have it. It's a quiet time of year, maybe that's sort of around June, July time. And then you've got your build to SummerSlam.
Yeah.
Post SummerSlam is when you could then have the Money in the Bank. Things drop off a little bit and lead things into Survivor Series. At least if you've got someone with a Money in the Bank briefcase leading into Survivor Series, which admittedly has been the case this year, but at least you've got something to potentially break up the monotony of those eliminator matches. Mm-hmm. And do we need a TLC in December?
What's the difference between a TLC and Extreme Rules? Because at TLC they just go, we'll have a tables match, or we'll have a table challenge. Extreme Rules, we'll have a tables match. It's a bit pointless. I guess they wanted to try and make each pay-per-view slightly different, but it's almost like they don't trust in their own storylines. Really, you want the match to, I would think, theoretically speaking, you want the match type to match the feud rather than the feud to be driven by the type of upcoming pay-per-view. But maybe the booking team is so weak these days that they feel they've got to chuck in the pay-per-view. Otherwise they won't know how to get there.
It'd be interesting to see how it plays out, and indeed whether anything changes based on COVID restriction. And they've already moved NXT to a different venue. Of course, the Thunderdome is the second venue that they've had in COVID era. They're still advertising WrestleMania is in LA. So.
Yeah. Of course, we're talking, or you're asking about this from when you say, do we need this? I think you're talking in terms of fans. Do we need it? Probably not, to be honest. If you look at a pay-per-view, you're lucky if half the matches are worth tuning in for. I guess the question is, why does the WWE feel they need this? I don't know what the answer is. It probably comes down to money and revenue and encouraging you to be on the network because there's every month a monthly event happening.
Certainly from TV, the Fox deal with SmackDown, and you keep building towards something. Sponsors, of course, every PPV is sponsored now by every match. It appears is sponsored by Skittles or
confectionery item. You talked at the beginning there. Yeah. Do you think that it should be a brand split so that you have a Raw pay-per-view and then a SmackDown pay-per-view?
No,
you don't. You think everything on every show.
Too much.
Yeah. But what I mean is, I agree. If every 2 weeks, I want to cry. But if it was every month, so actually you're only getting to see a pay-per-view of SmackDown every other month, and you maybe have the big four, or Rumble, Mania, Elimination Chamber, SummerSlam. Keeping Survivor Series. There you go. There's your 5 that everyone's involved in, and then the other 7 are sort of alternatives. Would that keep things a bit fresher?
Right, you've sold a bit more to me there. The benefit of doing that is that will force creative to think longer term. Because if they're booking 2 months out, they can't just be throwing matches together like they have done for Survivor Series this year. If there's a little bit of foresight going into some of these storylines, some of these promos, thinking more about, right, let's just stagger things for TV or whatever, like rather than everything just being rushed. Like, who really is sitting there writing the some of those skits that Riddle's reeled off? I mean,
I don't know, bro.
Time to move on.
Yeah, sure.
All right, closing section 3 of Wrestling Rebooked. Episode 10, double figures. Doc in review.
10 and 0.
So we've been mulling over the Percy Pringle, aka Paul Bearer documentary, which has been released on the network along with the thousands of hours worth of content on The Undertaker that exists over the last month or so. But nevertheless, we've picked this one out and think it's probably one of the, if you're going to make time to watch any of this Undertaker stuff, it's probably one of the better options. So we get a bit of a breakdown of Paul Bearer's career. Of course, initially starting out as Percy Pringle, as just a fan / photographer. Of course, was in Air Force and then ends up working the territories from the south of the US. Before transitioning into a wrestler as a heel wrestler, of course, he's also has a degree in mortuary science, which fits perfectly to the gimmick that he becomes. Manages Lex Luger, Rick Rude in WCW, Matt Borton, who became Doink the Clown, and of course Undertaker's first match when he's Texas Red against Bruiser Brody, before eventually going to the WWF, and of course then everything takes over with the Undertaker. You enjoyed it, Andeve?
Yeah, it's only 45 minutes, so
55.
55. Oh, fit my to maybe sleep for 10. Fit my attention span. I'm not sure where this documentary came from. I think they maybe have spliced together some other stuff and then sorted it into a Paul Bearer documentary. Although equally, I don't know if that's true at all. I could just made that up, so don't quote me. It's quite good because you get to see Paul Bearer's rise and fall again. So it's quite easy to follow what's happening. Takes in quite a lot of key elements. So he's almost, in terms of almost like if you think about Shakespeare sort of characters, he's almost like the narrator that accompanies the plot. And actually going through this documentary, you're able to see that in his involvement with the various storylines that are central to WWE for a good few years.
I think Glenn Jacobs, Kane, pretty much says that, doesn't he? Like he almost like narrates the career of the Undertaker and Kane. He's the reason that they were who they were and got themselves over. It's interesting you mentioned the way that they kind of spliced this together because, of course, this documentary has just been released in 2020, but the clips that they're showing of Paul Bearer himself were taken in 2011, where he's talking about his own career then. So first question, which obviously you don't have an answer to, I'm going to ask it generally though, that is, where's this material just been sat on? Why hasn't this come to the fore?
Yeah, it's you never know, but WWE is rolling those cameras 24/7.
They are now,
including for some of those documentaries. They must have hours and hours and reels of footage. So I guess when it comes to the 30th anniversary, and they think we haven't got enough Undertaker stuff on there. Let's chuck some more things at it. And it's easy enough for a team as competent as them, which they are good at, these documentaries and these packages and things, to chuck that together and set it up. So I imagine that's where the footage has come from. I don't know if they would have had it planned and held on to, or if they just sort of thought, let's throw it this weekend. But
yeah. There were some interesting takeaways though. So firstly, in the way that Paul Bearer was so instrumental in getting Undertaker over from his debut through to sort of 95, 96 before, but sort of pre-Attitude Era when they split them up. Specifically, something that caught my eye was, and it certainly takes you back to that era where the urn was so powerful. Yeah. Paul Bearer talks about how he needed to have something in his hand as he walked out to the ring. He just felt naked without holding something.
He used to have a stick and
with his
like blonde hair
gimmicks. Yeah. And of course, made sense to have an urn given the gimmick. But you look at people's faces in the crowd when the Undertaker is apparently finding power from the urn as he's trying to find the energy to create a hope spot in a match. And the investment from the crowd, and even just watching back is 100% there. Something you can never ever have today. Just doesn't work.
No, it really doesn't, because actually it's very hokey.
Of course,
someone coming to the ring as an Undertaker, but also sometimes as the undead man, and then a legitimate. I mean, he's called Paul Bearer after Paul. It's just ridiculous. And then he's holding up the end, but yet for some reason it just works, and you're able to be fully invested. And actually, is it Glenn Jacobs? Someone says on the show the Undertaker and Kane story is the greatest story WWE has ever told, and it was the story was Paul Bearer. He's the one that connects it,
common thread,
and is the sort of elocution of it comes through Paul Bearer. So when you think about that time with, I didn't know much about his pre-96 work, classic. But when you think about his involvement in terms of Undertaker and then Kane, and then also what he does with helping Mankind, and then back to Undertaker, and then helping them turn heel or face. I can't remember the exact chronology. And then he comes back later, and he's key to the Undertaker's revival, or come back at WrestleMania 20, I think. So he's actually much more than just a manager or someone accompanying him. He's actually an extension of the Undertaker persona and gimmick. And I think they also talk in the documentary about, and this is obviously before kayfabe was did, they were talking about Glenn Jacobs would turn up and he'd cover his head with a towel and all this stuff when they were getting off the bus. So very much, and of course, Paul Bearer, as you said, actually was a legitimate funeral guy. So fits perfectly into that whole gimmick and situation. Actually, the documentary is very good in the sense you want to learn something from it, and actually reframed a little bit how I thought about Paul Bearer and the importance of him in terms of his relevance.
Agree. And that critical point in time, actually, when WWE was very much on the downturn, sort of early 96, ratings were down, talent was stepping away into WCW, and there's Paul Bearer putting over, obviously, Taker with that storyline with Mankind, where they had the casket matches, and Paul Bearer turns heel on Mankind. So he's helping those two get over. Fast forward a year, 97, of course, 97, big year in wrestling for the reason that we don't often talk about on this show, the screw job. And there's Paul Bearer at Bad Blood introducing Kane, and he helps get Kane over, who has had, as we just mentioned, 2 failed gimmicks prior. So he absolutely was instrumental through that period, at least, through early Attitude Era, for all of those things that happened subsequently. Bigger story than Vince and Stone Cold, though?
I think it's certainly up there. Certainly think it's up there. I don't know if it's a bigger story, but they're sort of happening at the same sort of period, and maybe not at the same time, but in the same sort of period that you can link them up. We think about the matches they created with Kane and the Undertaker, and the casket matches, the first blood matches, the setting each other on fire matches, all that sort of stuff. Kane interrupting that Hell in a Cell. There's a lot there in terms of the weight of the story, and actually, Paul Bearer endures for a long time, and he's actually quite involved in all the face turns and the heel turns, and he does quite well because he sort of joins Kane, then he joins Undertaker, then he's back with Undertaker, then he's Kane, then he's Mankind, then he betrays Kane in favor of managing the Undertaker, and he's become a heel and all this sort of stuff. So he's actually very, very important in terms of all that, and he does well not to be like, oh great, yeah, because with the Big Show, for example, oh, is he a heel or a face? Doesn't matter. No one cares. Oh, he's turned heel, has he? I thought he was heel. Oh, he's face. Oh, is he a face this week? Oh no, he's a heel. Oh no, he is a face, but he's just doing heel stuff. At least Paul Bearer, who was doing that and switching between Kane and Undertaker, every time he did it, you were in on it and compelled as part of it. And I think part of that is his, just like the Undertaker, and that's why I would say he's an extension of the Undertaker gimmick. Is part of that is how well he portrayed what he was doing, as the mortician, with his legitimate background, and his facial expressions and stuff are absolutely fantastic. The way he contorts his face and things, superb.
Another thing you wouldn't get away with today.
No,
They get totally laughed at.
Yeah, no, probably not. And probably the closest thing to him today in terms of face expression stuff is Heyman, but actually Heyman is a sort of quite a straight character, fits within the realms of normality, whereas obviously Undertaker, Kane, Paul Bearer are all, Paul Bearer not himself, but sort of that have an element of the supernatural to them.
Probably a better example, if you're comparing to today, is Bray Wyatt. And all the stuff going on at the moment with the Fiend.
Yeah. But obviously, much further on, he is almost his own. Again, he's quite committed to the gimmick, but he's also his own mouthpiece because he talks through himself as Bray Wyatt on the Funhouse and stuff. And actually, what has been really a struggle for Wyatt, I think, these last few months is the incoherence of what he's about in terms of when we go back to that swamp match and stuff. I've forgotten about that.
And do it to yourself.
But in terms of, it didn't really make sense. Well, hold on, what's Strowman doing here? Why is Alexa Bliss here? Whereas actually Paul Bearer did a great job of pulling together the continuity of the story. And as he starts to reveal extra stuff, like you've got a brother, you burned down your funeral home, I'm actually the father, killed your mother, all this sort of stuff. Actually, he does a good job in threading that together.
I think there's probably a few other points here to touch on before we wrap things up. I think you alluded to at the start, and it's certainly a common thread through the documentary that he is just like a kid living his dreams. It can't get much better for him, you know, a wrestling fan that's a mortician, and there he is, like living out that gimmick. And it makes the whole documentary very watchable, just along that ride.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, he said. I mean, initially he wanted to be a wrestler, didn't he? I can't think of anyone who looks less equipped to be a wrestler than he does. But also how much he changed his gimmick. Although he sort of started off as a bleach blonde, stick waving classic Southern guy, and then he's turned into this dark haired, white pale faced, black suited mortician.
Yeah, well, that was of course Vince's request, wasn't it?
Yeah, but that's surprising that you tend to think, I mean, genius, is it accident or design? And you'd have thought, well, they must have gone out and looked for this, but actually he was signed up to WWE, and then Vince was like, oh, you're a funeral director, fantastic. We've got this character that's an undertaker. We're going to pair you together. You think, well, hold on, you didn't think about that in advance. It was accident.
Yeah. Well, it's better than that. They were actively looking for a manager, of course, weren't they? Because he had a couple before that. Brother Love, DiBiase.
Yeah, that's true.
Which didn't really work.
Brother Love actually hands on that baton, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Live. But I mean, in the sense of Vince, we think, oh, what a genius move. Actually, it was something that was as much accident as it was intention.
Perfect storm.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think the whole documentary kind of plays out in creating a bit of a hook. Like when you talk about The Undertaker switching to his American Badass gimmick, and of course at that point Bearer is a little bit redundant, and that's when he starts to have problems with his health. So it's quite interesting the way, and we've talked about the way WWE portray characters and create the documentaries before, when Paul Bearer is having all of his issues with his weight and his health, that they make a specific point in the documentary of saying, hey, we actually paid for his gastric bypass and we tried to help him, but, you know, we just couldn't help him in the end. So, and of course, then he dies 2013, goes in the Hall of Fame. There's a big section in the documentary where there's we definitely know that he's gone into the Hall of Fame. So it's funny because given the amount of attention now that we're talking about responsibilities of the company and the contractors, and how much responsibility should the company take for the wrestler's health? It's debatable as to whether they did here. Yeah.
I suppose one final thing to add to that. I mean, the point I'm about to talk about, his health is gone, he's dead. But the CM Punk storyline shortly after he dies, where he's doing stuff like tipping the ashes and the urn onto Bearer, and they talk about that in the documentary. And I remember watching that at the time, thinking it's a bit risque, isn't it? But they say in the documentary, well, what better way for Paul Bearer to be immortalized or remembered than to be part of the story and the storyline that he's always been part of? But again, that comes back to the idea that WWE mixing that, if there's a real life angle that we can chuck into the mix. And, they did that with Paul Bearer being the funeral director, and they do that with his death with the match at 29.
Yeah. It's interesting, all the wrestlers, well, Taker, Mark Calloway, Kane, actually in the documentary saying that as well, though.
Yeah, they all say he would have enjoyed it, he would have wanted it. And actually, I suppose we think about it from the point of view of a fan, thinking, his family probably aren't up for that, but I presume his family would have been asked, and whether or not they're up for it or not, probably the individual, given what he says about, and you've said earlier about him living his dream and just being part of it and all that sort of stuff, probably was like, what a great way to continue the legacy.
And his family obviously weren't that bothered. They're at the Hall of Fame the next year, the Hall of Fame induction.
Yeah.
Which you were at too, weren't you?
Yeah, indeed. And so was The Undertaker, who came out in gimmick, which I think is also in the documentary to the urn. So, and quite incredibly, Paul Bearer, when he dies, is 60, I think they say in the documentary. And we've got Undertaker now retiring at 55. There's only 5 years difference between them. In fact, he died at 50. He was 58. He wasn't even 60. So the difference between them in terms of age, it looks a lot on stage, but actually isn't that much at all. Which begs the question: how was he able to be the Kane's father and all that? But maybe that's a biological question rather than a storyline one.
So to wrap things up, Paul Bearer documentary worth checking out. If you're going to watch anything relating to the Undertaker in the 30 years, and you're not going to watch any of his fantastic matches, that's definitely.
Or his Stone Cold +1, which is about 2.5 hours, isn't it? Then they've got another Stone Cold podcast.
Yeah.
Off the back of the last one.
Yeah. Add it to the list. Right. WrestlingRebooked.podbean.com for all previous episodes. We'll be back for the TLC review. You'll be looking forward to that, won't you?
TLC, absolutely. As long as there's some lots of tables, more ladders, and just some decent matches that fit into a storyline. Please.
Until next time.
Time to tap out.
Wrestling Rebooked. Spoiler in Andeve. Putting wrestling into submission. Welcome to Wrestling Rebooked with Spoiler and Andeve, rewriting your favorite angles the way we want to believe. Putting wrestling into submission, finally that time has come. We used to rely on Meltzer, now we bang our own drum. Wrestling Rebooked. Spoiler in Andeve, putting wrestling into submission. The Spot Monkey is here, shooting from the hip, back to break more, and ready to let rip. Spoiler is the host. Will his mic be ready to go? He loves a Mac Clinic, and we're ready to start the show. From Mania to Survivor Series, a wrestling podcast. Each match rebooked, fresh views are cast. Wrestling Rebooked. Spoiler in Andeve, putting wrestling into submission. Our finger is on the pulse for all the latest news. What's going on with Vince? We don't really get his views. We love a docket review, old school to new. I think it's time to tap out. Hit the music. We're through. Wrestling Rebooked. Spoiler in Andeve, putting wrestling into submission.